Picture this. It's night. The fire's burned low. Outside, the wind howls through wooden slats and thatched roofs. And inside, somewhere between the smell of goat and unwashed feet, you wake up. It's the year 1325. You're 22 years old, which makes you practically ancient, and your bed is a straw-filled sack that hasn't known comfort or cleanliness since ever. You sit up. Your back cracks like firewood. The church bell tolls, and with it begins another day of cold, filth, hunger, and survival. Tonight, we're not just talking about history. We're living it. No castles, no gallant knights, just the raw, unfiltered nightmare of everyday life in the Middle Ages. Drop a comment with where you're watching from and what time it is. I always love seeing where this strange little global village gathers from. All right, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan. Let it hum like a distant storm. And let's begin. Welcome to medieval Europe. You're alive. But unfortunately, so are the fleas. You wake to the sound of a bell. Not the friendly kind that signals breakfast, but the heavy metallic clanging of the village church tower. It tolls through the cold morning mist like a judge's gavel, harsh, final, and inescapable. Your eyes creak open, and reality sets in. You're not in a cozy bed. You're lying on a mattress of the half-rotted straw, lumpy with dirt, hay, and the occasional scurrying insect. It smells like a barn floor, probably because it was a barn floor 3 tenants ago. No pillow, no sheets, just a wool blanket stiff with last winter's sweat and this month's grime, heavy enough to crush small rodents. Which is ironic, because they're living in it too. You shiver. It's cold. Always cold. Your joints ache like you've been hit by a cart. You're 22, but your spine bends like you've survived 4 lifetimes of bad harvests and worse mattresses. As the bell tolls again, you sit up, slowly, painfully, and look around your home. 1 room, no windows, no privacy. Just a dirt floor and walls made of timber and hope. Your parents, 2 younger siblings, a goat, and an uncle, no one remembers inviting, are all snoring in various corners of the space. One of them lets out a sharp cough that sounds like it's rehearsing for a plague. The goat farts. The scent lingers. You stand, feet hitting the floor with a damp squelch. Rain leaked through the thatched roof again. Or maybe it wasn't rain. You don't want to know. The floor is part mud, part mystery, and fully alive. Your feet are bare, because you don't own shoes. Not real ones, just bits of leather stitched together with threadbare hope, currently drying by the fire. And by drying, you mean growing mold. As you stretch, your tunic shifts. It's the only one you own. You've worn it every day for over a year, and it smells like it. Sweat, smoke, something vaguely fungal. You scratch your scalp, hoping it's just dry skin. It's not. Lice, your constant companions, are already up and moving, greeting the day. The hut is dark, the only light seeping through cracks in the door and a few gaps between the wall beams. Outside, you hear the village slowly coming alive. Chickens cluck. Someone's shouting about a pig. Somewhere nearby, a child cries. Somewhere farther off, a man coughs. The kind of wet, rattling cough that's either a mild cold or the beginning of a funeral. And still, this is normal. You step outside into the grey dawn. The sky hangs low, heavy with clouds that promise either rain or regret. The air smells of smoke, dung, and old beer. The street, if you can call it that, is a winding, muddy trench lined with wooden huts and open drains. Someone has already dumped a bucket of waste from an upper window. A splash, a scream, a splash again. This is your world. This is your morning. Welcome to life in 1325. You've survived the night. But the day? The day has only just begun. You've managed to drag yourself outside into the bleak morning light. But now nature calls. And it's not the polite invitation you're used to in the modern world. There's no porcelain throne waiting for you. No tiled bathroom with a gentle flush and soft toilet paper. Instead, you have the privilege of a wooden bucket shoved behind the hut. It's full, really full. Last night, Uncle Wolfstan had one too many bad turnips and left a souvenir that's still fermenting. You hold your breath because the smell is biblical. You do your business quickly because every second spent near the bucket is a gamble with your dignity and your lungs. Then comes the ritual that's somehow both humiliating and dangerous. You toss the contents out the window into the street below. Guardelou, you shout, the old French warning meaning, watch out below. But no one moves fast enough. The streets in your village are open sewers, rivers of human waste, animal droppings, and unidentifiable liquids that you definitely don't want to identify. If you're lucky enough to live in a town with public latrines, congratulations. You get to share a stinky bench with strangers, shoulder to shoulder, breathing in the aroma of a dozen unwashed bodies and perhaps striking up awkward small talk. Privacy is a myth here, and ventilation is a cruel joke. Toilet paper, forget it. Straw, leaves, rags, moss, or sometimes nothing at all, serve as your wiping materials. No wonder handshakes aren't popular. If you live in a castle, things are only marginally better. Your privy might be a hole in the wall dropping waste directly into the moat. Clever, except that enemies have been known to climb up the same hole during attacks. Talk about entering through the back door. You step away from the toilet ordeal, thankful to have survived without falling face first into humanity's leftovers. Now, if you thought breakfast might be a consolation, think again. You settle near the fire with your morning meal, or what passes for one. A wooden bowl sits in front of you, filled with pottage. It's a thick, gloopy stew that's been simmering in the same pot for days, maybe weeks. The ingredients are a sad collection of grains, root vegetables, and the occasional dried bean, if you're lucky. Bread accompanies the pottage, but don't expect fluffy slices. This loaf is dense, hard enough to deflect arrows, and so stale it requires negotiation rather than slicing. Made from rye or barley flour, it's often bulked out with sawdust or ground up acorns, because wheat is a luxury reserved for the wealthy. For a drink, you have weak ale, medieval beer with low alcohol, brewed because water is a deadly gamble, often teeming with parasites and disease. Kids drink it too, because it's safer than the alternative. But no one is exactly thrilled about starting the day with beer. Meat and cheese, rare treats reserved for Sundays or feast days, when the local lord is feeling generous. Fresh fruit is seasonal and often fermented into wine. Spices? Only for royalty, because a pinch of pepper could cost more than a month's wages. You eat quickly, aware that this breakfast won't energize you. It will only sustain you enough to face the long, brutal day ahead. And so you finish your pottage, grit your teeth against the sour ale, and prepare to step fully into the relentless grind that is medieval life. The weather doesn't care about your misery. It's less a season and more an ongoing medieval punishment. Winter is a nightmare. Your wooden hut has walls with gaps so large you could throw a chicken through them. The windows? Covered with cloth, not glass. The fire in your hearth might look cozy, but there's never enough wood to keep it burning all night. Gathering wood from the forest is often illegal and punishable by death. Yes, you could be executed for picking up the wrong stick. So you bundle up in your damp, scratchy wool tunic and huddle near the dying embers, praying your nose doesn't freeze off in the night. Your feet are perpetually cold and damp, your fingers stiff as if they're turning into tiny medieval popsicles. Frostbite isn't diagnosed, it's just bad luck. Then comes summer. You'd think it's better, but no. Your home transforms into a clay oven with no ventilation, no fans, no relief. You sweat through your layers, but can't remove them. Showing too much skin is scandalous and invites sunburn, insect bites, and social judgment. Flies swarm in hordes, buzzing around your unwashed body and the fermenting goat stew in the corner. Mosquitoes dive-bomb your face while you try to sleep, assuming you can at all through the constant noise of yelling neighbors and crying babies. Outside, the sun beats down mercilessly. There's no sunblock and no hat, except the desperate, lopsided straw one you fashioned yourself. Heatstroke isn't a medical emergency. It's just taking a bad turn. Whether freezing cold or baking hot, the weather doesn't care if you're itching, exhausted, or barely holding on. And through it all, your clothes still itch, your food is still awful, and your back-breaking job is still waiting. Welcome to medieval climate control. There is none. After surviving the weather's cruel swings, you'd think food might offer some relief. Think again. Breakfast isn't a comforting ritual. There are no sizzling bacon strips, no steaming coffee, no fresh fruit smoothies. If you're lucky, you sit down to a wooden bowl filled with something called pottage, a thick, gloopy stew that's more experiment than meal. Pottage is made from whatever the fields and forests have grudgingly offered. Grains, root vegetables, maybe a few beans. It simmers in the same pot for days, sometimes weeks, with fresh ingredients tossed on top of old leftovers like some kind of medieval science experiment gone wrong. The side dish? A hunk of bread so hard it could deflect arrows. Made from rye or barley flour, it's often bulked up with sawdust, ground acorns, or other creative fillers, because wheat is a luxury only the rich can afford. This loaf isn't something you slice. It's something you negotiate with, hoping to break off a piece without losing a tooth. Drink? Forget your orange juice or oat milk latte. You start your day with weak ale, low in alcohol, high in survival value, because the water is often so contaminated that a gulp might kill you faster than hunger. Kids drink it too. No, Not in a college keg party way. More like, this is all we've got, so suck it up. Meat and cheese, only on Sundays or feast days, and even then, only if your lord feels generous. Most peasants go months, even years, without tasting fresh meat. Fresh fruit? Only when it's in season and hasn't fermented into wine or vinegar yet. Spices? Forget it. A pinch of pepper costs more than a month's wages. Salt is so precious, it's locked away, guarded like gold. So you gnaw on your gritty bread, sip your weak ale, and try not to think about the rat that might have nibbled your porridge in the night. Breakfast doesn't energize you. It just happens to you. And after that, you better be ready to work. Because nothing in medieval Europe comes easy. And nothing comes free. If you thought the food was rough, wait until you get a load of medieval hygiene. There's no toothbrush, no toothpaste, no mouthwash, and floss? Not even a glimmer of that idea. The concept of oral hygiene is as rare as a sunny day in a medieval winter. Some might gnaw on twigs, or rinse their mouths with wine or vinegar if they're lucky. But for most people, their teeth are left to fend for themselves, and they're not doing well. By the time you hit your mid-20s, your smile looks like something from a haunted crypt. Cavities are everywhere, gums swollen and bleeding. The dark stains aren't just from food, they're decay eating away at your teeth. Sugar is becoming more common among the wealthy, and ironically, that only makes their dental problems worse. For the poor, it's a slow, grinding process of rot caused by fermented bread, gritty porridge, and hard chewing. Toothaches? You get used to them. They're like medieval weather, always looming in the background, sometimes unbearable. And the treatment? Well, dentists didn't really exist. Instead, barber surgeons, the same folks who cut hair, would pull teeth by candlelight using iron hooks and zero anesthesia. If an infection took hold, it could lead to sepsis and death. A toothache could literally be a death sentence. Socially, bad breath was everywhere. If you were single, your land and livestock mattered more than your smile. Your mouth was a battlefield, and it was losing. Bathing? It was rare. Many went months without washing. Soap was expensive and often reserved for the rich. People believed washing too often could cause illness. Lice, fleas, and bedbugs weren't just nuisances. They were constant companions, living rent-free on your body. Scratching was a daily ritual, often done with a wooden spoon in the open company of neighbors and clergy alike. If you developed a rash or infection, tough luck, no dermatologist, no ointments. You suffered and hoped for the best. Medieval hygiene was less about cleanliness and more about survival against the odds. So, you've had your crusty bread, dodged the fleas, and wiped with a handful of hay. Congratulations, it's time to start your real day. There is no commute, there's no office, there's no weekend, sick leave, lunch break, or retirement plan. Your job, like 90% of the population? Survive by working the land that belongs to someone else. You're a peasant, which means you're born into labor, and you'll likely die doing it. Your hands are calloused, your back bent, and your dreams mostly involve not getting dysentery. The sun is your alarm clock, and it doesn't care if you slept badly on your bug-riddled straw mattress. You rise at dawn and toil until sunset, 6 days a week. Sunday is a rest day, which often still includes chores, church, and maybe fighting off raiders or praying your neighbor's cow plague doesn't spread. tools of the trade? A wooden hoe, a rusted sickle, and whatever bones you haven't broken yet. There's no mechanization, no shortcuts, just human strength, aching joints, and the constant looming threat of starvation. You plow fields by hand or with the help of oxen, if your village can afford one. You plant, weed, dig irrigation ditches, and carry buckets of water like your life depends on it. Because it does. And if you're a woman, you're pulling double duty. In addition to the fields, you're tending to children, spinning wool, milking goats, baking bread, hauling water, sweeping the one-room hut, feeding your lice-ridden husband, and pretending the chickens in the house aren't driving you insane. Children aren't spared. By the age of 5, they're miniature laborers. No school, no playtime, just chores scaled to their size, picking weeds, gathering firewood, shooing rats. Their toys are rocks and sticks. Their dreams are smaller versions of yours. Think you're lucky because you're not a farmer? Maybe you're a blacksmith, tanner, or cooper. Congratulations. You're still working 12-hour days in a windowless workshop, inhaling fumes or handling rotting hides. It's less of a job and more of an endurance test. Break a bone? Tough. Get the flu. Drink some warm ale and get back to it. You can't afford to stop because the landowner doesn't care and your family still needs food. If you fall behind, someone else will take your place. You are replaceable, even in your own home. Your pay? Mostly survival. Maybe a hunk of meat on feast days. Maybe not. There's no ladder to climb. No promotions. Just the grim satisfaction of knowing you didn't die. Yet, in modern life, seasons are cozy chapters. You have sweaters for fall, sunscreen for summer, hot cocoa in winter, and maybe some spring allergies for balance. In the Middle Ages, seasons aren't charming. They're survival obstacles, each with their own method of punishment. Let's start with winter. You're freezing always. Your house is made of timber and daub, with gaps wide enough to invite in wind, snow, and entire rodents. There's no insulation, no double glazing. Your windows are cloth flaps. Your walls leak drafts like a sieve, and your bed feels like sleeping in a damp tomb. Firewood? A luxury. Trees belong to the local lord, and collecting wood from his forest could legally get you fined or executed. So you ration what little you have, huddling by dying embers, shivering in your one stiff wool tunic while frost creeps inside. Your breath fogs the air inside your hut. Your water bucket turns to ice overnight. Your feet stay damp and numb. And when the snow piles up, you don't marvel at the winter wonderland. You pray it doesn't collapse your roof. Frostbite isn't diagnosed. It's just a slow, creeping doom that takes your toes and leaves you limping until infection sets in. Then comes spring, the false hope. The snow melts into sludge. Mud is everywhere, breeding grounds for bacteria, parasites, and the occasional tragic faceplant. Your thatched roof leaks. The fields are soaked. Everything stinks. You're either ankle-deep in mud or trying to coax crops out of frozen soil. Good luck with either. Next is summer, the part where nature turns from passive-aggressive to openly hostile. Your house is now a poorly ventilated oven. No fans, no breezes, no showers. You sweat through your one outfit, which you cannot remove because modesty and sunburn are equally terrifying. You stink. Everyone stinks. You all stew in your own humidity and social denial. The flies arrive like a biblical curse, buzzing around your face, laying eggs on everything, and finding every open sore on your body. Mosquitoes swarm, lice thrive, fleas feast. And the food you're trying to store, it's either rotting, fermenting, or crawling away. Then there's the sun itself, beating down on your already overworked body as you plow the fields. There's no sunscreen. Hats are for the rich. You tie a piece of cloth over your head and hope the heat stroke is merciful. Finally, autumn, the closest thing to a reprieve. If your harvest was decent, you'll store some food. If not, winter's going to be especially cruel. Autumn is busy, frantic, and riddled with anxiety. You're preparing to survive another rotation of medieval misery. You dry meat if you have it, seal up your root cellar, and try to plug up the holes in your hut with whatever straw or mud you can find. But no matter the season, 3 things remain consistent. Your clothes still itch, your food is still terrible, and you're always one bad day away from death. You're thirsty. You've just trudged across a sun-baked field, or woken up freezing under a stiff wool blanket. Your mouth dry and coated with the texture of old breadcrumbs and regret. Naturally, you reach for water. But in the Middle Ages, water is not your friend. It looks fine. Bubbling stream, cool well, maybe even rainwater collected in a barrel. But looks deceive. This water is not a refreshing reprieve. It's a bacterial brew, a microscopic horror show swirling with human waste, decomposing animals, and the entire medieval town's idea of sanitation. The street. Remember, that's where everyone dumps their chamber pots. The phrase waterborne illness doesn't exist yet, but its effects are everywhere. Diarrhea, dysentery, typhoid, cholera, all deadly. You wouldn't see the germs, of course, but you'd absolutely see their work. People dropping like flies after just a sip. Children dehydrated to death. Adults weakened and unable to work, which in medieval terms might as well be a death sentence. So, what's the solution? You drink beer. Yes, beer. For breakfast. For lunch. For toddlers, it's called small beer, low alcohol, barely fermented, and just enough to kill the worst of the microbes without sending you staggering into your livestock. Not exactly a party, but it keeps you alive. Everyone drinks it. Children as young as 2 sip from wooden mugs. Pregnant women drink it. Monks brew it. Peasants rely on it. Water is only considered safe if it's boiled, and no one's wasting precious firewood on that unless it's absolutely necessary. So you drink beer and pretend it's quenching your thirst, even as it slowly saps your energy and bloats your belly. If you're lucky enough to live near a clean well, and that's a big if, you might occasionally sip water that won't poison you. But wells are often contaminated too, especially when built too close to latrines or animal pens, which, to be clear, are basically everywhere. And if you're a monk or a noble with access to mountain springs, congratulations, you're still suspicious of water, because in your world, clear doesn't mean clean. It just means you haven't found the dead pigeon yet. Now, let's say you do get sick from bad water. Vomiting, fever, shaking. What do? You pray. You bleed yourself with a leech. Or you accept that your fate now lies somewhere between divine intervention and your body's ability to expel demons via diarrhea. And before you think wine is the answer, it isn't. Wine is for the wealthy, expensive to import, and spoiled easily. Peasants don't drink wine unless it's watered down leftovers from their lord's feast, and even then, it's usually sour and spiked with herbs to cover the taste of mold. Water, the basic building block of life, except in medieval Europe, where it might build your coffin. Dinner is approaching, or more accurately, the moment of reckoning where your stomach growls like a wounded boar, and you realize it's pottage time again. Let's set the scene. You sit near a hearth that's barely more than her glowing coals and wish for something hearty, flavorful, warm. Instead, a familiar wooden bowl is thrust into your hands, filled with a grayish slop that smells like someone boiled sadness and despair together. Pottage, the lifeblood of the medieval peasant. It's not quite soup, not quite stew. It's more like culinary glue. Thick, pasty, and always suspiciously different depending on what was scraped off the floor or yanked from the dirt that day. Root vegetables? Maybe. Turnips if you're lucky. Onions if you're blessed. Leeks if your neighbor owes you a favor. Lentils and beans show up once in a blue moon. And meat? Forget it. Unless a chicken conveniently dies of natural causes, or natural causes involving a very sharp knife and plausible deniability, you're not tasting animal protein tonight. The pot never empties. It just simmers forever, with new ingredients dumped in daily, mingling with yesterday's leftovers and last week's bad decisions. The flavor. Imagine licking a damp root cellar that's been gently smoked with peat and disappointment. If you live near a forest and risk your life poaching, you might bring home a rabbit, but that's a hanging offense, literally. The king owns the deer. You get moss, mushrooms, and anything that doesn't run away fast enough. On the side, you'll find a hunk of bread so dense it could be used as a self-defense weapon. Made from rye, barley, or oats, whatever grains didn't get infested with weevils. It's rough, gritty, and occasionally seasoned with sawdust or powdered bark if flour is short, which it always is. This bread isn't sliced. It's negotiated. You gnaw on it like a determined rodent, hoping not to crack a tooth, already hanging on by faith alone. Now, if it's a feast day or tsurare, and your lord is feeling generous, you might get a scrap of bacon fat or a piece of salted fish so pungent it could raise the dead. Spices? A fantasy. Pepper costs more than your monthly earnings. Nutmeg might as well be unicorn horn. Salt is locked up like treasure and rationed like gold dust. But the worst part, it never changes. Day in, day out. Pottage, bread, weak ale. Maybe some cheese if a cow didn't die of something weird this week. Fruit is for summer, nuts for squirrels, and your dreams for another life. And if you're a noble, it's a little better, but not by much. You might dine in a hall, seated at a long table under a drafty ceiling, served trenchers, flat slabs of stale bread used as edible plates topped with spiced stews, roasted birds, or pies filled with everything from lamb to eel. Fancy? Sure. Hygienic? Not even close. Cooks have dirty hands. Kitchens are swarming with flies. And the meat is often halfway to spoiled, masked only by vinegar and cloves. Even royalty gets sick from their food. They just do it on silk cushions. So as you spoon your fifth bowl of questionable pottage, staring down a bread brick so tough it could qualify as armor, you realize something deeply medieval. Hunger is constant, food is survival, and flavor is a myth. Let's be brutally honest. If you've made it this far, you already stink. And so does everyone around you. The year is 1347. You've just come back from the fields, or the smithy, or the communal cesspit. Don't ask. Your tunic is damp with sweat, your hair is matted, and your feet are so crusted with grime they might qualify as a new layer of sediment. You would love a bath. But bathing? That's a luxury. In early medieval times, public bathhouses were actually a thing, thanks to leftover Roman infrastructure and a vague understanding that washing is nice. But by the later Middle Ages, things went downhill, fast. Between outbreaks of plague, religious guilt, and the growing idea that nudity leads to sin and sin leads to hell, washing kind of fell out of fashion. The average peasant might rinse their face and hands in cold water, once a week if they're ambitious. Full-body baths, maybe on feast days, maybe. And it'll be in a wooden tub that's shared by the whole family, starting with Dad and ending with the baby. By then, the water has become a kind of human soup. Bon appetit. Now, don't get too smug, nobles. Sure, you might have perfumes, scented gloves, or rose water, but you're still rubbing it over filth. A spritz of lavender oil doesn't make up for the fact that your chamber pot hasn't been emptied in 2 days, and you just walked through a stable in velvet shoes. Toilets? Let's talk about it. You squat over a wooden hole above a pit. If you're lucky, the hole is indoors. If you're not, it's a shack out back with spiders, rats, and the ghosts of meals past. Some castles had vertical shafts that dumped everything straight into the moat. Romantic, right? Moat monsters? Real. They're just turds in fancy water. Toilet paper? Ha! Dried moss, leaves, hay. Or, if you're truly unfortunate, your left hand and a prayer. Soap exists. It's made of animal fat and lye, but it smells like misery and burns your eyes. Hair care? Women braid it up to keep it clean-ish. Men shove on caps to hide the grease. Lice are not a possibility. They are a guarantee. Combs have 2 functions: styling and pest control. Teeth, they rot. Slowly, painfully, and often. There's no toothpaste, no floss, and no understanding of sugar's role in decay. People chew herbs or rub ashes on their gums. If a tooth goes bad, it gets yanked out with iron tongs. No anesthetic. Screaming optional, but expected. Clothing is rarely washed, often infested, and usually stinks. Underwear? You have 1 set. 2 if you're royalty. You sleep in it, sweat in it, work in it. When it finally gets washed, it's beaten on a rock beside a freezing stream while cursing your ancestors. But the worst part? You go nose blind. Everyone stinks so equally, so completely, that no one notices anymore, except the travelers. They step off their ship from somewhere slightly less awful, sniff the air, and immediately regret every life choice. So, the next time you light a candle in your home, or enjoy the scent of fresh laundry, just take a second and appreciate that you live in a time when hot water, soap, and a flushing toilet aren't the stuff of fantasy. Because in medieval Europe, you didn't bathe to get clean. You bathed to survive the smell. You've made it through another day without dying of plague, starvation, or being trampled by a cart. Congratulations. But don't get too comfortable. Nightfall doesn't bring peace. It brings a whole new round of discomfort. Let's set the scene. The sun is down, the hearth fire has been banked, and your one beeswax candle is flickering like it's auditioning for a horror film. Your medieval bedroom, if you're lucky enough to have one, is a small, drafty chamber with walls that sweat in the winter and trap heat in the summer. The straw-stuffed mattress on the wooden frame creaks ominously under you. It's not just straw. There's old bugs, lice, maybe a mouse if it's cozy enough. You pull a coarse woolen blanket over yourself. It smells like wet sheep and decades of suffering. There's no such thing as pajamas. You sleep in your undergarments, which, if you recall from the last chapter, are not exactly fresh. And you're not alone. If you're a peasant, your entire family, parents, siblings, and whatever kids survived infancy, are all in the same room, maybe the same bed. If you're a noble, servants might be sleeping on the floor nearby. Privacy is a modern invention. Oh, and let's not forget the livestock. Yes, chickens, goats, or even a pig might be snoozing near the fire or in a corner of the room. Why? Because they generate heat. Also, because they're your most valuable assets, and if you leave them outside, someone might steal them or eat them, or both. Now you'd think that after a day of back-breaking labor and plague paranoia, you'd pass out instantly. But medieval sleep is complicated. People in the Middle Ages typically followed what's called segmented sleep. 2 chunks of slumber, separated by a period of wakefulness in the middle of the night, usually around an hour or 2. During that in-between time, people might pray, reflect on dreams, gossip quietly, or, if they weren't completely repulsed by each other, engage in a bit of medieval romance, aka under-blanket fumbling while the pig pretends not to listen. And what about the soundscape? Forget peaceful crickets or white noise machines. You've got creaking wood, wind howling through unsealed gaps, people snoring, coughing, babies crying, dogs barking, and sometimes, quite literally, the howls of wolves in the distance. If you live near a church, expect bells. If you live in a city, expect drunks yelling and buckets of waste being tossed out windows. Gardez-le. Heads up. Your only defense against nightmares? A charm, a prayer, or a piece of iron under the bed to ward off demons. That's right. Sleep paralysis was interpreted as a demon sitting on your chest. Nightmares were messages from God. Insomnia was a form of penance. And sleepwalking? Clearly a sign the devil was playing puppeteer with your soul. And when winter hits, you don't sleep so much as hibernate. You go to bed early because there's no light, and you wake late because it's still dark and cold. So cold. Your breath fogs the air. Ice creeps along the inside of the windows, if you have them. The fire's out. You huddle in tight. It's not restful. It's survival. But hey, at least you're not in the stocks, or the gallows, or in a shallow grave under a plague stone. So next time you complain about your mattress being too soft, or your partner stealing the duvet, just remember, in medieval times, you were lucky if you didn't wake up with your blanket frozen to the wall. Forget playgrounds, birthday parties, or carefree summer vacations. In the Middle Ages, childhood was not a golden time. It was more like a brief tutorial level, and most people didn't make it past it. Let's start with birth. Medieval childbirth was a high-stakes gamble. No hospitals, no antibiotics, no prenatal vitamins. The odds of a mother or baby, or both, dying during birth were alarmingly high. Midwives were the heroes of the day, using herbal remedies, superstition, and sheer willpower to pull new life into a very unforgiving world. If the baby survived the ordeal of birth, it had one job: don't die in the next 5 years. About 30 to 50% of children didn't make it to adulthood. The causes? Pick your poison: infections, diarrhea from bad water, starvation, accidents, or diseases like smallpox and measles. A skinned knee wasn't just a mild inconvenience. It could become infected and led to death. And what about toys and games? Sure, kids played when they weren't hauling water, tending animals, or trying not to be trampled by carts. They had dolls made of rags, carved wooden animals, or hoops to roll down the road. Poor children played games like catch the rat before it bites you in your sleep. Unofficial title: education, only if you were wealthy or in the church's favor. Peasant kids were taught how to do chores early and efficiently. If you were lucky enough to be a boy of noble birth, you might be sent off to foster with another family, or into the clergy. Both options involving strict discipline and the occasional beating. Because, of course, spare the rod, spoil the child wasn't just a saying, it was policy. Girls taught to sew, cook, tend younger siblings, and basically prep for marriage by age 12. That's not a joke. Marriage in early teens wasn't uncommon, especially if it secured land, peace treaties, or a goat. But wait, there's more. Let's talk clothing: scratchy, ill-fitting, and often handed down through many siblings until it was more whole than fabric. No shoes in summer, and sometimes not in winter either. No soap either. Hygiene was a luxury, not a given. If lice didn't like you, you were probably dead. And what about discipline? Corporal punishment was the go-to method. Disobedient children could expect beatings from parents, teachers, or even priests. Emotional well-being wasn't really on the radar. The general vibe was, we'll love you if you live long enough to help harvest turnips. Despite all this, kids still found joy. They played, they laughed, they made mischief. Childhood wasn't just doom and gloom. It was brief, brutal, but not entirely without spark. It's just that growing up fast wasn't optional. It was survival. If life in the Middle Ages was nasty, brutish, and short, death was the one guarantee. And yet, it wasn't the end. At least not according to the people who lived it. For them, death was only the beginning of the real story. Let's start with the dying part. Death didn't come quietly. Whether it was from disease, childbirth, battle wounds, starvation, or just being in the wrong place with a very sharp rake, most medieval deaths were messy. But there was one universal goal: die right. That meant confessing your sins, receiving the last rites, and, if you were lucky, not being completely alone when the lights went out. Why? Because dying without a priest nearby was risky. Your soul might get stuck in purgatory longer, or worse, go straight to hell because someone forgot to sprinkle holy water on you while you were choking on rat stew. Now, the funeral. You're dead. What happens next? If your family had any means at all, they'd dress you in your best, least lice-infested clothes, wrap you in a shroud, and hold a vigil. Candles, prayers, a few whispered regrets, and depending on how well-liked you were, maybe some tears. If you were wealthy or clergy, the funeral could be elaborate. Incense, Latin chanting, carved effigies on your tomb. If you were poor, well, into the ground you went, quickly, quietly, and usually with a lot of other people in a shared plot. Cemeteries weren't always peaceful gardens of rest. They could be chaotic, overcrowded, and, thanks to frequent plagues, occasionally exhumed to make room for newcomers. It was not uncommon to dig a grave and find someone else already there. And then there were the ghosts. Medieval people absolutely believed in ghosts. Souls trapped in purgatory were thought to wander, unfinished business dragging them back to the world of the living. These weren't just spooky stories, they were moral stories. Ghosts often appeared to beg for prayers or warn the living to repent. Forget Casper. These spirits were here to guilt-trip you into lighting a candle or donating to the church. You also had to watch out for the restless dead. People who were excommunicated, died suddenly, without confession, or were just generally unpleasant in life. These folks might come back as revenants. Think zombie-adjacent. There are accounts of villagers digging up and reburying bodies with stones in their mouths or stakes through their chests just to make sure they stayed down. Yes, vampires before Dracula, only they didn't sparkle. They oozed. What about the afterlife? This was the real kicker. People in the Middle Ages didn't just fear death, they feared what came next. Heaven was the goal, of course, but the road was long, treacherous, and required serious paperwork in the form of prayers, alms, and good deeds. For most, the destination was purgatory, a kind of divine laundromat where your soul got scrubbed of sins, painfully, for decades or centuries. Hell? Oh, hell was very real. Preachers loved to describe it in vivid detail. Rivers of fire, pits of snakes, demons with forks, and you screaming eternally because you skipped church that one Sunday to recover from dysentery. But hope wasn't lost. Masses could be paid for. Monks would pray on your behalf. If you left enough money to the church, you might even get a fast pass through purgatory. Medieval people feared death, yes, but they also tried to prepare for it. Because eternity was a long time, and no one wanted to spend it on reggae. Imagine waking up to the sound of church bells, not for a celebration, but for another funeral. Again, and again, and again. By the time you finish your stale barley bread, half your street is gone. No one's sure why. No one's sure who's next. Welcome to the Black Death. It starts in 1347. A ship docks in Sicily. It's carrying goods and something else. Infected rats. Or rather, infected fleas on the rats. Within days, people start showing symptoms. Fever, chills, vomiting, mysterious black swellings in the groin or armpit, called buboes. Within days, they're dead. The disease spreads like wildfire. By the time it burns through Europe, it's killed somewhere between 30% and 60% of the population. That's not a typo. That's 1 in every 3, or more. Whole towns are wiped out. Farms are abandoned. Orphaned children roam the roads. Corpses rot in the streets. In some places, there are so many bodies. Priests can't bury them fast enough. Mass graves become the norm. The smell is unimaginable, and the fear palpable. People think it's divine punishment, maybe for greed, lust, blasphemy, or all of the above. Some turn to prayer, others to extreme forms of repentance. Enter the flagellants, groups of men who march from town to town, whipping themselves in public, begging God to forgive humanity. Still others look for scapegoats. Jews are accused of poisoning wells and are persecuted across Europe. Thousands are murdered. It's a brutal reminder that when fear reigns, reason often dies first. What's worse, no one knows how it spreads. The idea of germs won't exist for centuries. Some blame bad air, others planetary alignment. One popular belief, that bathing opens your pores and lets in the disease, so people stop washing. Spoiler, that doesn't help. Medicine is helpless. Doctors wear long robes and the now famous plague masks, beaked contraptions stuffed with herbs and spices to filter the air. They look terrifying. They are. And they don't work. So what's left? Panic. Chaos. And then silence. Because eventually, the plague burns out. Too many people are dead for it to keep going. And the survivors? They come out into a changed world. Villages are empty. Labor is scarce. Feudalism starts to crack. Wages rise. And people begin to question things. Authority, tradition, even the church. In a twisted way, the Black Death resets the social order. It devastates, but also disrupts. And in the ashes, something new begins to stir. If you thought surviving the plague was the hard part, think again. Welcome to the everyday battlefield of medieval healthcare, where the treatment might kill you faster than the disease, and hygiene is more of a rumor than a routine. Bathing, a dangerous luxury. In the early Middle Ages, bathing was a thing. Public bathhouses existed, and people actually liked being clean. But that changed. By the time the Black Death rolled in, many believed water opened your pores and let in disease. So people stopped bathing for health reasons. Yes, on purpose. Instead of washing, they masked their odor with herbs, scented cloth, or just ignored it. Linen shirts were worn under tunics to absorb sweat, and you might rinse those occasionally. As for soap, it existed, but it was harsh, expensive, and rare. If you wanted to clean yourself, you'd have to boil water, a luxury, find ash or lye, caustic, and scrub until your skin screamed. You know that ye old musty stench people joke about. That wasn't an exaggeration. It was Tuesday, the itch that never ends. Every single person, peasant or noble, lived in a state of constant infestation. Fleas, lice, and bedbugs were as common as dirt, and they traveled freely between hair, clothing, and bedrolls. Everyone scratched, all the time, publicly, without shame. Forget skincare. Your complexion wasn't judged. It was survived. A rash might be caused by anything from bedbug bites to ringworm to actual scabies. No one knew the difference. No one had treatment. The only real remedy. Hope it didn't spread too much before your immune system gave up. Medieval medicine. Guesswork with leeches. Let's talk doctors, or rather, the idea of them. Most physicians were trained in university, but believed illness was caused by imbalanced humors. 4 mystical fluids in your body: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. Feeling off? Probably too much black bile. Solution? Drain some blood. Enter the leech. Bloodletting was common, done with knives, cups, or live leeches. It was thought to restore balance. In reality, it just weakened you more. But hey, the fever went away. Because you were unconscious. If you couldn't afford a doctor, you might visit a local wise woman or herbalist. Some were genuinely unhelpful. Others recommended remedies like carrying a dead toad in your pocket to cure plague boils, drinking crushed emeralds for stomach pain. Bad idea. Applying cow dung and crushed snails to wounds. Worse idea. Rubbing a roasted mouse on your gums for toothache. Just no. And if you were really unlucky, you ended up in the hands of the barber surgeon, the multitasker of medieval misery. Need a haircut? Great. A tooth pulled? Done. A leg amputated? Sure. But he's using the same knife he just trimmed someone's beard with. No anesthesia, no antibiotics. Just screaming, praying, and possibly dying of infection later. Mental health. What's that? Feeling overwhelmed? Sad? Paranoid? Congratulations, you're possessed by demons. The only cure? Exorcism, penance, or confinement. Mental illness wasn't understood. It was feared, often punished. People with visible differences, tremors, tics, seizures, were viewed with suspicion. Many were ostracized, imprisoned, or worse. Compassion was rare. Science, rarer still. Imagine living in a world where every sneeze might be a curse, every illness a punishment, and every success a blessing from unseen forces. In medieval Europe, religion wasn't just a part of life. it was life. The church ruled hearts, minds, and even the law, and its influence stretched from birth to burial. The power of the church. The medieval church wasn't just a place to pray. It was the ultimate authority, political, social, and spiritual. The local priest was your doctor, your judge, your confessor, and your social worker rolled into one. Going to Mass wasn't optional. It was mandatory. Missing church was a sin, punishable by fines, public shame, or worse. The church calendar dictated everything: holidays, fasting days, feast days, even when you could marry or harvest your crops. The clergy preached that life's suffering was part of God's plan. Disease, God's punishment for sin. Bad harvest, a test of faith. You accepted misery as a path to salvation, with the promise of eternal reward after death. Saints, relics, and miracles. Saints were medieval celebrities. People believed saints could intervene on their behalf, heal the sick, or protect their villages. Pilgrimages to relics, bones, clothing, or even body parts of saints were common. Some churches displayed miraculous relics that supposedly bled or glowed. Thousands flocked to shrines, hoping for miracles, some honest, some staged by crafty monks. The church encouraged relic veneration, which helped maintain its power and wealth. Fear of the devil and witchcraft. But religion was also a source of terror. The devil wasn't just a story. He was real and everywhere. People blamed evil spirits for accidents, illnesses, and bad luck. When things went wrong, a crop failed, a child fell ill, a neighbor died, suspicion often turned to witchcraft. Accused witches were believed to have sold their souls to the devil and caused harm through curses or potions. Trials for witchcraft were brutal, often involving torture and execution. Innocent people, mostly women, were scapegoated for society's problems: prayer, penance, and punishment. Medieval people prayed constantly, morning, noon, and night. Prayers were meant to protect from evil, secure blessings, and prepare the soul for judgment. Confession was crucial. Sins had to be confessed to a priest who assigned penance, prayers, fasting, or even physical punishment. Some medieval punishments were downright cruel, designed to cleanse the soul. Yet despite this harshness, faith gave people hope. The promise of heaven was powerful, enough to endure endless suffering on earth. Religion shaped every moment of medieval life, a mix of comfort, control, and cruelty that made survival as much a spiritual challenge as a physical one. Picture waking up not in a quiet countryside, but in a cramped, noisy medieval village or town. Unlike the sprawling open fields, towns were bustling centers, packed tight with narrow streets, wooden houses leaning on each other, and a constant haze of smoke, and more smoke. The layout, crowded and cramped. Medieval towns had no urban planning. Streets were narrow and winding, often muddy or worse, clogged with waste. Houses were made of wood and thatch, highly flammable, which made fires an ever-present nightmare. Many homes were one-room affairs where people cooked, slept, and worked in the same space. Privacy? A medieval myth. Everyone knew everyone's business because walls were thin, windows were shutters, no glass, and sound traveled like wildfire. The smell, Forget any modern notions of fresh air. Medieval towns were an assault on the senses. Garbage, human and animal waste, rotting food, and the stench of tanneries or butcher shops mingled in the air. There were no sewage systems. Waste was dumped in the streets or nearby rivers. Rats and fleas thrived here, spreading disease like wildfire. The Black Death, which would later ravage Europe, found perfect breeding grounds in these grimy streets. Social life and hierarchy towns were vibrant, but tough places to live. Markets buzzed with vendors selling everything from bread to cloth to livestock. Craftsmen like blacksmiths, cobblers, and weavers worked long hours producing the essentials of daily life. Yet life was sharply divided by class. Wealthy merchants and guildmasters lived better, often in sturdier stone houses. Peasants, laborers, and servants squeezed into the lower, more dangerous quarters. Guilds controlled trades and protected their members, but also kept outsiders out. Being a guild member meant security, but also strict rules and obligations. Danger everywhere. Medieval towns weren't safe. Crime was common. Pickpockets, thieves, and violent brawls were part of daily life. Law enforcement was rudimentary, often relying on local lords or town guards, who were sometimes as corrupt as the criminals. Fire was a constant threat, capable of wiping out entire neighborhoods in minutes. Without organized firefighting, people formed bucket brigades, or simply fled, and watched helplessly. Disease spread rapidly due to overcrowding and poor sanitation. Epidemics could decimate towns, leaving survivors traumatized and struggling to rebuild. Community and festivities. Despite hardships, townsfolk found ways to celebrate. Festivals, fairs, and church holidays brought temporary relief from the grind. Music, dancing, and food filled the streets, and people gathered to share news and stories. The market square was the heart of town life, a place of commerce, gossip, public punishments, and even executions. Medieval towns were a chaotic blend of community and hardship, a place where survival was a daily battle against disease, fire, poverty, and violence, yet also a hub of human connection and resilience. Imagine feeling sick or injured in medieval times. Unlike today's hospitals and doctors, your options were limited and often dangerous. The healers, barbers, apothecaries, and wise women. There were no modern doctors. Instead, medicine was a patchwork of barber surgeons, apothecaries, monks, and wise women. Barber surgeons cut hair, pulled teeth, and performed bloodletting, often with little training. They used razor-sharp tools, candles for lighting, and zero anesthesia. Apothecaries sold herbs, ointments, and potions, a mix of helpful remedies and strange concoctions. Monks copied medical texts and tended to the sick in monasteries using prayers and herbal knowledge. Wise women or local healers used folk remedies, herbal knowledge passed through generations, and sometimes magic spells or charms. Common treatments: bloodletting and balancing. Humors. Medieval medicine was rooted in the theory of the four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Illness was thought to result from an imbalance. Bloodletting was the go-to cure, draining excess blood with leeches or knives. Sometimes this helped, but often it weakened patients further. Other treatments included herbal poultices, steam baths, and even trepanation, drilling holes in the skull for headaches or mental illness. Herbs and remedies. Some herbs genuinely helped. Garlic for infections, willow bark for pain, the basis for aspirin, and chamomile for calming nerves. But many remedies were bizarre or toxic, involving animal parts, minerals, or poisonous plants. Magic and superstition mingled with medicine. Amulets to ward off evil spirits were common. Diseases and epidemics. Plagues, fevers, and infections were rampant. Without knowledge of germs or hygiene, disease spread easily. The Black Death, bubonic plague, devastated Europe in the 14th century, killing millions. Treatments were ineffective and often cruel, including quarantines, flagellation, or blaming marginalized groups. Wounds easily became infected. Without antibiotics, even a small cut could turn deadly. Pain and surgery. Surgery was a last resort. Without anesthesia or sterilization, operations were agonizing and often fatal. Surgeons worked by candlelight, using crude tools. Pulling rotten teeth was common, sometimes done by barbers with pliers. Despite the horrors, some surgeons made impressive advances in techniques, but pain and death were everyday risks. Mental health. Mental illness was poorly understood. People with conditions like epilepsy, depression, or psychosis were often feared or mistreated. Some were cared for in monasteries, others were shunned or accused of witchcraft. Medieval medicine was a strange mix of trial, error, superstition, and occasional brilliance. But for the average person, sickness was a terrifying, often deadly ordeal. Picture a medieval child waking up in a world far harsher than any playground nightmare today. Childhood, as we know it, was a fleeting luxury. Adulthood cut short. Most children didn't have the chance to linger in innocence. Infant mortality was tragically high. Many never lived past their 5th birthday. Diseases like measles, smallpox, and malnutrition stole the lives of countless little ones. For those who survived, childhood meant early responsibility. By age 5, many children were already expected to help with chores, fetching water, tending animals, gathering firewood. Toys and games were simple and rare luxuries, often homemade from scraps. Education, a privilege, not a right. Formal education was limited mostly to boys from wealthy or noble families. Monasteries and cathedral schools taught reading, writing, Latin, and religious studies, but these were reserved for the privileged. Most peasant children learned practical skills instead: farming, cooking, weaving, and other trades. Girls were trained at home to run households, care for siblings, and help with domestic tasks. Literacy was scarce among the lower classes. Books were rare, expensive, and handwritten by monks, a treasure few could afford or read. Child labor and apprenticeships. From an early age, children were expected to contribute to family survival. Apprenticeships started around age 10 or 12 for those lucky enough to learn a trade: blacksmithing, carpentry, or weaving. This was grueling work with long hours, minimal pay, and little safety. But it offered a chance for skill, steady food, and perhaps a small step toward independence. Play, religion, and social life. Despite hardship, children found moments of joy, simple games, folk songs, and seasonal festivals. Religion played a huge role in daily life. Children attended church regularly, learned prayers, and participated in rituals that marked the rhythms of life and death. But the ever-present threats of disease, famine, and war cast long shadows over these youthful joys. Hope amid hardship. Childhood in the Middle Ages was a precarious balance of fragile health, early responsibility, and scarce opportunity. Yet, like today, children dreamed of better days, of surviving, thriving, and maybe one day changing their fate. The medieval world was brutal, but the resilience of its youngest souls reminds us that even in the darkest times, hope endures. And with that, our journey through medieval life comes to an end. From the harsh dawn of each day to the quiet hopes of childhood, the Middle Ages were a world both brutal and profoundly human. Thanks for traveling back in time with me. If you want to dive deeper into any part of this fascinating era or explore another time period, just say the word